The first knock was soft. The second one wasn't. Just two sharp taps. Nothing else. She stood on the porch like a warning. Tiny, barefoot. A girl not more than 3. Pale knees dusted in dirt. Cheeks streaked like she'd wiped them with ash. A wooden spoon clutched in one hand. In the other, a folded paper. Her eyes didn't blink. She didn't smile. The widow opened the door halfway. "You lost." The girl didn't answer. "You with someone?" Nothing. Just the wind between them. The woman stepped out looking both ways. The dirt road was empty. No wagon sounds, no hoofprints, no calls from the trees. She crouched. "Where's your mama?" The girl held out the note. Her fingers were cold. The paper was warm. The woman read it once. "Feed her once and she'll stay forever." She folded it. Didn't ask who wrote it. Just moved aside. "Are you hungry?" The girl nodded once. Inside, the kitchen was still warm from boiled beans. The woman reheated what was left. Set out a chipped bowl, poured slowly. No talking. The girl climbed onto the bench like she'd done it before. Didn't ask permission. I tucked the spoon into the bowl and ate. Small bites. Clean ones. Her hands were steady. The widow leaned on the counter, watched. "Got a name?" No answer. "Don't talk much, do you?" Still nothing. "Can't leave you outside, not with night coming." She poured herself a cup of coffee, black and burnt. The girl finished her bowl, licked the spoon, set it down without a sound. "Where'd you come from?" Silence. "You gonna answer anything?" The girl blinked once. That was it. The woman exhaled. "All right." She brought a wash basin, heated some water on the stove. "You're filthy." The girl stood without being told, let the woman scrub her feet, wipe her face, pull her tangled hair into a rough braid. "You're too quiet. It ain't normal." No response. The girl pointed to the rocking chair, sat down, rocked once, then again. Then it didn't stop. The widow froze in the doorway. That chair hadn't moved since the man died. She hadn't touched it, hadn't even looked at it some days. And now it creaked slow, like something settling in. "You sleeping here tonight, I guess." The girl didn't nod, didn't thank her, just kept rocking. The woman made up the couch with the spare blanket, left her own bedroom door open, lit one oil lamp. That night she lay awake, listening. The chair kept creaking, back and forth, like a breath that wouldn't end. She got up once to check. The girl sat just the same, eyes half closed, spoon clutched to her chest now. The widow stared for a long time. "Are you sure you're real?" The girl didn't move. She sat in the doorway till dawn. Then I went to the stove, boiled oats, heated milk, poured 2 bowls. When she turned, the girl was at the table. "You dream." The girl didn't answer. "You sleep?" No nod. Just spoon to lips. One bite at a time. Outside, crows circled the bare tree. The road stayed empty. No one came looking. The widow opened the paper again. "Feed her once, and she'll stay forever." She folded it smaller this time, tucked it in the crack behind the sugar tin, sat across from the girl. "Are you staying?" No answer. Just one last scrape of the spoon. Empty bowl, eyes steady. The widow pushed her own bowl away, lit a cigarette. "You got no shoes." The girl wiggled her toes. "You got no name." The girl blinked. "You got a spoon." The girl gripped it tighter. "Is that your answer to everything?" Nothing. The widow stood, pulled a jar from the shelf. Inside were little things, buttons, ribbons, thimbles. She took out a red ribbon, handed it over. The girl tied it around the spoon. The woman stared. Well, hell. She poured 2 more cups of coffee. The girl took hers without flinching. Didn't sip, just held it like she knew how. By noon, the wind picked up. Dust swirled. The road stayed quiet. The widow fixed the fence out back. When she looked up, the girl was in the chair again, rocking. "She's not real," the woman muttered. But she fed her again that night. Warm stew, bread with salt, a slice of apple if there was one. The girl ate everything. Silent, grateful maybe, or just patient. "Are you staying?" the woman asked once more. The girl looked at her spoon. The woman exhaled hard. Sat down. "You got a look in your eyes like you've been here before." Silence. The chair rocked. The note stayed hidden. But the woman thought about it every time she looked at the girl. The spoon tapped twice against the table. Not once, not three, just two. And the woman didn't sleep much that night either. The chair groaned before the lamp was even lit. The girl had claimed it without asking. A small body pressed into the high back, spoon still clutched in her fist, rocking slowly. The widow froze at the sight of it. That chair hadn't moved in months, not since her husband's last night. It had sat stiff in the corner, wood-worn, fabric sagged, but silent. Now it creaked like it had breath again. "Are you comfortable?" she asked. The girl's eyes followed her, but no words came, just the steady push of toes against the floor. "You know whose chair that is?" No answer. The rhythm never broke. The widow leaned on the doorframe, arms crossed. "Don't reckon it matters to you." The girl blinked once. The widow turned back to the kitchen. She dug out the folded note from behind the sugar tin. I opened it in the dim light. The words hadn't changed. "Feed her once, and she'll stay forever." She read it out loud, low and sharp. "Forever? Ain't no such thing." The girl tilted her head, like she'd heard every word. The chair creaked louder, back and forth. The widow folded the note tight again, slid it into her apron. "Pocket this time. Keep it close. Are you planning on talking? Ever?" Silence. Rocking. "You can't just sit and stare all night." The girl lifted her spoon, tapped it once on the arm of the chair. The woman felt her chest tighten. "Don't do that." Tap. The widow stepped forward, hand outstretched, but stopped herself. She let the girl be. Dinner passed quietly. The girl ate everything put in front of her, like before. No fuss, no sound but spoon against bowl. When the dishes were done, the widow carried the oil lamp to her own room. She left the door open again. The rocking didn't stop. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, each creak timed with her breath. She tried to match it, then tried to fight it. Neither worked. Finally, she sat up. "That's enough," she muttered. She padded down the hall barefoot. The girl was still there, eyes half-lidded, rocking like sleep wouldn't touch her, spoon against her chest. "You can't sit there till morning." The girl blinked, rocked once more. "Fine, stay." The woman turned away, climbed back into bed. But the noise didn't quit. Around midnight, a new sound joined it, a shuffle above her head. Light, dragging, like something across wood. She froze under the quilt. She whispered into the dark. "Ain't no one up there." Another shuffle, then a soft thump. She pressed her palms over her ears. It didn't help. She counted the creaks of the chair. Count the drags above. They blended into one rhythm. At dawn, she rose with red eyes. Coffee boiled bitter. She poured 2 cups. The girl appeared in the doorway. Spoon in one hand, hair tangled, still rocking even when she walked, as if her body carried the chair's memory. The widow shoved a cup across the table. "You hear it too?" The girl sipped, slow. Didn't flinch at the heat. "You hear the noise upstairs?" Silence. "Something's in the attic." The girl set the cup down, raised her spoon, pointed upward. The woman exhaled hard. "So you do know." She grabbed her coat, pulled down the attic cord. The ladder dropped with dust. "You coming?" The girl shook her head, climbed back into the rocking chair. The widow cursed under her breath, hold the lantern high, climbed slowly. The attic smelled of dust and cedar. The air was colder. She moved the light around. Boxes, trunks, old quilts, nothing else. She whispered to herself, "See, empty." Then something brushed her shoulder. She spun fast, and the lantern raised. Nothing there. The chair below creaked, steady, louder than ever. "Damn it!" She backed down the ladder. "It's nothing." The girl rocked harder, spoon tapping against the armrest now. "Stop that!" Tap. "I said stop." The girl lowered the spoon, but her eyes never left the widow's face. By afternoon, the house felt smaller. Every board groaned. Every wall seemed closer. She tried sewing, reading, fixing the hinge on the back door. But the rocking sound never quit. "You'll drive me crazy," she muttered. The girl didn't blink. That night, the noises in the attic returned. Louder, not just dragging, a shuffle like feet, a sigh like a breath. The widow sat up, trembling. "You hear it?" The girl spoke her first clear word. "Yes." The woman's blood went cold. She stared across the room at the small shape in the chair. "You can talk." "Yes." "How long have you been able to?" The girl rocked once more. "Forever." The widow's hands shook. She pulled the note from her pocket, stared at the words again. Feed her once, and she'll stay forever, she whispered, voice cracking. What are you? The girl clutched the spoon, smiled for the first time. The attic groaned louder, and the chair rocked on. The morning dragged on quietly. The girl hadn't spoken again since that one word in the dark. She sat in the chair, rocking, spoon clutched, eyes fixed on the widow as if waiting. You can't just be nameless, the widow muttered. She was slicing bread, rough and crooked. Folks'll ask. They'll need something to call you. The girl didn't answer. You hear me? Silence. Just the creak of wood. The widow set down the knife. Ruth, she said finally. The name hung in the air. That's what I'll call you. The girl blinked. No nod. No smile. Just steady eyes, like she'd been given that name before. Ruth it is, the widow said again, firmer. You'll answer it. The girl rocked once, slow. By noon, they needed flour. The widow wrapped her shawl, told Ruth to come along. The child walked beside her, spoon tucked against her chest like a shield, bare feet on dirt, not even flinching at the stones. The store bell rang sharp as they stepped inside. The sheriff was there already, hat low, leaning against the counter. He turned, saw the girl, and froze. That one ain't yours, he said flatly. The widow's grip tightened on her shawl. Don't reckon she's yours either. He straightened, slow. Where'd you pick her up? On my porch. You feed her? The widow didn't answer. He smirked. Then she's yours. But you don't want that burden. She's just a child. She ain't. The girl slipped behind flour sacks stacked by the wall. Hid quick, quiet, like she knew how. The sheriff's eyes followed. Don't let her stay. Folks that do don't keep their peace long. The widow squared her shoulders. Peace ain't much worth keeping these days. The sheriff stepped closer, his boots loud on the boards. You'll regret it. Then I'll regret it. His gaze burned, then broke. He dropped coins on the counter, tipped his hat, and left. The bell rang again. Silence after. The widow exhaled, turned. Ruth, the girl peeked from behind the sacks, crept out, spoon tight in her hand. The wood of it was different now, notched, carved with small lines, fresh and sharp. The widow crouched low. What did you get there? The girl didn't speak. She showed the spoon. The carved lines looked like scratches at first, but together they shaped something. A crude letter, an R. You do that? The girl nodded once. You can write, but you won't talk. Silence. The widow sighed and stood. Paid for the flour. Took Ruth's hand on the way out. It was small, cold, stronger than it looked. The road back stretched long. Dust swirled around their ankles. Ruth walked steady, spoon clutched tight. You know what that letter means? The widow asked. Ruth looked up, silent. That's your name, Ruth. You marked it yourself. The girl's eyes didn't move, but the spoon stayed firm in her grip. Back home, the widow set the flour down. Her hands trembled faintly, though she tried to hide it. He looked at you like he knew you. Sheriffs don't look at anyone that way. Ruth climbed back into the chair, rocked once, twice. You're not scared, are you? The girl shook her head. You should be. The attic groaned above, boards shifting in slow protest. The widow's head snapped upward. Ruth kept rocking, calm, spoon balanced across her knees. The widow grabbed the broom, slammed the ceiling once. Stay quiet up there. The house went still. Only the chair creaked. That night, supper was plain. Bread, beans, a strip of meat. Ruth ate without a sound. The widow finally spoke. That man thinks you're a curse. Ruth looked up, eyes dark in the lamplight. You cursed? No answer. You mine. The girl placed the spoon flat on the table, pointed at the carved R. The widow exhaled. All right then. You're Ruth. The rocking chair groaned again, though no one sat in it now. The girl had left it for the table. Still, it moved, slow, back and forth. The widow rose, slammed her palm against it. Stop. It still is. She looked back at Ruth. What do you want from me? The girl picked up her spoon, held it close. The attic gave one long sigh. Boards bowed. The widow shut her eyes tight. Lord help me, Ruth whispered then, soft, almost broken, not a full word, just a sound. The widow leaned in. Say it again. Nothing. The girl was silent once more. The widow dropped into her chair, hands shaking, breath rough. The note pressed against her ribs through the apron pocket. Feed her once and she'll stay forever. Her eyes stayed on the girl, on the spoon, on the carved letter, shining faint in the lamplight. Ruth didn't look away. The rocking chair started again, all on its own. By morning, the house had changed. Scratches lined the back door, deep grooves like something clawed its way in. The widow pressed her fingers against them, splinters biting her skin. They hadn't been there the night before. "Ruth," she called. The girl sat at the table, spoon in, her lap, eyes steady. "You do this?" Ruth shook her head once. "Don't lie." Another shake, calm, certain. The widow glanced at the mirror above the stove. The glass had fogged white, though no steam touched it. She wiped it clean with her sleeve. The cloud came back at once. Her breath caught. "What are you bringing in here?" Ruth only hummed. A low tune, thin but steady. The widow froze. It was the same lullaby her own mother used to sing. Long ago, in another bed, in another house. Words she hadn't heard since she was small. "Where'd you learn that?" No answer, just the hum. She grabbed Ruth's wrist, tighter than she meant. "Tell me." The girl didn't flinch. Her eyes softened, but the song never broke. The widow let go, stepped back. Her throat is dry. "That's impossible." The chair creaked in the other room. No one sat in it. The widow pressed her palms to her head. "I'm losing it." The attic groaned above them again, long, heavy, as though the roof itself carried weight it couldn't hold. Ruth hummed louder, drowning it out. The widow moved across the floor, pacing, until her heel caught on a loose board. She bent, tugged it up. Beneath, a small drawer she'd never known was there. Dust sealed the edges, but the wood slid free like it had been waiting. Inside lay a folded photograph, yellowed, corners bent. Her hands shook as she pulled it up to the light. The picture showed a child, bare feet, spoon clutched in her hand, the same eyes, the same red ribbon tied neatly. Her breath left her body. No. Ruth watched her, silent now. "This ain't real." She shoved the photo back into the drawer, slammed the board shut. "It ain't." But the drawer slid open again on its own. The photo on top. The widow staggered back, knees buckling against the table. She pressed her hands flat on the wood, trying to breathe. "Have you been here before?" Her voice cracked. "You sat in this house before I was even born." Ruth tapped her spoon against the table. Once, twice. The widow grabbed the note from her apron pocket. The words stared back. "Feed her once and she'll stay forever." "Forever," she whispered. "God help me." The mirror above the stove clouded again. This time, shapes moved in the mist, outlines of faces, a woman's, a child, then gone. The widow turned hard on Ruth. "You tell me what you are." The girl hummed again. Same lullaby. Software tender. The widow's eyes filled. She sat down hard, covering her face. "Mama used to sing that to me." The girl reached across the table. Her hand rested on the widow's arm, small, cold. The rocking chair groaned from the other room, steady as a heartbeat. The widow dropped her hands and met the girl's stare. "You can't be mine. You can't." The photo slid closer across the table, though no hand touched it. It stopped in front of her. Her fingers hovered, then took it again. She studied the child's face, the ribbon, the spoon. She couldn't deny it. It was Ruth. The girl leaned back, spoon against her chest, rocking though no chair was beneath her. The widow's voice broke. "Why me? Why here?" The attic answered with a drag of something heavy. Boards cried out under the weight. Ruth turned her eyes upward, then back to the widow. "You brought this with you," the widow whispered. The girl tapped her spoon. 3 times now. The scratches on the door deepened with a sound like nails tearing through wood. The widow rose fast, slammed the door shut, locked it, pressed her back against it. "You won't take this house from me. You won't." Ruth hummed on, calm, steady. The mirror clouded again. The widow grabbed a rag, wiped hard until her hand burned. The fog clung stubborn. Faces shifted within. She dropped the rag, stumbled back. The photograph slid off the table onto the floor. The girl climbed down, picked it up, and held it out to her. The widow refused. Ruth pressed it into her hand anyway. The rocking chair grew louder, though still empty. The widow's knees gave way. She dropped into her seat, photo in her lap, note in her pocket, scratches at her back. She whispered into the silence, voice trembling. "This house knows you." The girl nodded once, "And it knows me." The attic moaned again. The widow clutched the photo tighter. "Then it'll bury us both." The girl rocked slowly, spoon against her lips, the lullaby drifting soft into the dark. He came before sunrise. The dogs didn't bark. The wind didn't carry dust. Just boots on gravel and the sharp snap of a rope coiled tight in his fist. The widow was already at the stove, boiling oats. Her hands shook, just slightly. She hadn't slept. The attic hadn't let her. The knock was hard. No hesitation. She opened the door slowly, and there he was. Hat low, jaw locked, rope looped once around his hand, trailing like a tail. "Morning," he said. Her eyes dropped to the rope. "You lost?" He pushed past her into the house. "You don't walk in uninvited." "I don't wait when it's like this." The girl was sitting at the table, spoon against her mouth, quiet as always. The sheriff stopped cold when he saw her. "You still got her. She ain't livestock. She's worse. She's Ruth." "She's not Ruth," he snapped. "She's something else." The girl stared up at him, unblinking. He looked back at the widow. "You don't know what you've done. I fed a child." He threw the rope onto the floor. "That child's been fed before. You think you're the first." The widow's face twisted. "What are you saying?" The sheriff took a step closer. "That one ain't yours. She doesn't belong to anyone. She chooses where she stays." "She didn't choose me. She just showed up." "That's the same damn thing." Ruth stood now, slow, spoon still in her hand. She didn't move toward him, just looked. "I've seen her before," the sheriff muttered. "Years ago. On the ridge. Little girl. Same eyes, same face, same damn spoon." The widow frowned. "You were a boy then." He nodded. "I followed her, though she was lost. She led me to a door I wasn't supposed to open." "What door?" "My granddad's. The one he kept bolted. She made me open it." Ruth tilted her head. "He was dead inside," the sheriff said flatly. "Slumped over, rope around his neck. Still warm." The widow's voice cracked. "What does that have to do with her?" "She found him. She led me. She's a child." He pointed at Ruth. "She's dead." Ruth blinked, then slowly, quietly, said one word. "Leave." The air in the kitchen dropped. The spoon in her hand didn't move, but the rope on the floor curled like it had been touched. The sheriff stepped back. "What did you say?" "Leave." The rope coiled tighter. He turned to the widow. "You heard that?" "I did." She spoke. "She did." He backed toward the door. "You think that's normal?" "No." "You think she's safe?" "No." "But she's mine now." He paused at the threshold. "You keep her. She'll hollow you out from the inside. You'll look in the mirror one morning and not recognize what's staring back." "She already knows the house." The sheriff's eyes flared. "What?" "She knew about the drawer, the lullaby. She brought the attic alive." "Then burn the place down. Don't let it keep breathing." The widow took a step forward. "You came here with a rope." He didn't answer. "You were going to use it." "I didn't know what I'd find." "She's just a girl." "She's not." "She is. She's what's left of whatever this town's buried, and she doesn't want to be buried anymore." The widow stepped between him and the girl. "Then let her stay." The sheriff stared for a long moment. Then he picked up the rope, turned away. Before he stepped out, he looked back. "There'll be others. Curious ones. Brave ones. Don't let her follow 'em." "She doesn't follow. She waits." He left. The door shut behind him with no sound. The widow turned. Ruth was still standing, spoon by her side. "You said a word." The girl nodded. "You told him to leave." Another nod. "Do you remember him?" "Yes." "Have you been here before?" "Yes." The attic above moaned again. The widow whispered, "Why me?" Ruth looked at her spoon. "Because you stayed." The widow sank into a chair, covered her face. "I should have let the porch stay empty." The chair in the next room began to rock again. Ruth stepped forward, climbed into the widow's lap without asking, set the spoon between them. The woman didn't move, didn't speak. She just held the vase. Girl. And the attic creaked like someone pacing slow, deliberate steps overhead. It was early evening when the spoon slipped from Ruth's hand and sank into the boiling stew. No sound, no splash, just vanished beneath the surface. The widow saw it too late. She turned, lunged, hissed through her teeth as steam rushed up and seared her wrist. She grabbed the ladle instead, fished through chunks of meat and potato until the spoon rose with a lazy swirl, bobbing like a drowned thing. The ribbon had come undone. The wood had gone dark, not burned, but blackened through, like it had soaked up something deeper than broth. The carved R still clung to the handle, only now it looked branded, not etched. Ruth stood silent on the other side of the stove. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. The widow laid the spoon on the counter, watching steam lift off its surface like smoke off coals. "You dropped it on purpose." Ruth didn't answer. "You knew it'd do that." The girl stared at the spoon, not the woman. Her hands were folded. Her mouth is still. "I ought to throw it out," the widow said, turning toward the back door. "I ought to bury it somewhere no one'll ever dig." But her feet didn't move. Behind her, Ruth said softly, "Don't." The widow froze. "Why not?" "It's mine." The widow turned around. "It's ruined." Ruth walked over, picked it up with both hands like it was fragile glass, not charred wood. The widow's breath caught. "You changed it, or it changed you." Ruth nodded once. "It's ready now." "For what?" No answer. That night, they didn't eat. The stew had gone sour somehow, spoiled from the inside out. It smelled of iron and something older. The widow dumped it outside, deep into the brush behind the barn. She came back with her palms shaking and her jaw locked. Ruth sat by the fireplace with the spoon in her lap. She rocked in the chair, slow and steady, eyes half-lidded. She hadn't spoken again. The widow lit one lamp, leaving the rest of the house dark. She poured herself a glass of something bitter and warm, sat by the table, watched the girl as the minutes crawled. "Why do you sit there like that?" she finally asked. Ruth didn't respond. "It's like you're waiting for someone to return." Still nothing. The fire crackled soft. The attic above them made no sound at all. She slept uneasy that night, lay stiff on her side, eyes cracked open, one hand near the drawer where the note was folded, though she didn't read it again. Sleep came late, and when it came hard, with weight. She dreamed of a woman in a cotton dress, dark hair undone, being dragged backward through the front door of the same house, her house, by men whose faces were blurred and bent by shadow. The woman screamed, legs kicking, heels carving long lines into the floorboards. In the dream, the widow stood at the top of the stairs, frozen, watching. Somewhere behind her, a baby cried, thin, cracked, high like the sound came through walls. The cry grew louder with each second, drowning out the woman's screams. She turned, opened a door. The baby wasn't in a crib. It sat upright on the floor, holding a spoon. Ruth. The widow woke up gasping. Sweat clung to her neck. Her hands ached, curled into fists. She swung her legs out of bed, heart slamming against her ribs. The hallway was dark. The lamp still burned low in the kitchen. She stepped into the room. Ruth was sitting by the window now, spoon against her chest, watching something outside. "You dream too?" the widow asked. Ruth nodded once. "Same as me?" "Yes." "You were here," she whispered. "Even then, I never left." The widow's stomach twisted. That woman, she was real? Yes? She had a child. Ruth looked up at her. She tried to take me. But she wasn't the first, was she? Ruth shook her head. The widow sank into a chair. Her hands gripped the edges. "You don't age. No. You stay. I was fed." The widow stared into the dark beyond the windows. "How long have you been doing this?" Ruth tilted her head. "Since the first house let me in." The spoon pulsed faintly in her hand, catching light that wasn't there. "What is it now?" the widow asked. "That spoon." "It remembers." "Remember what?" Ruth didn't say. The attic above them groaned again, long and deep, like breath through rotted teeth. The widow shivered. "And what happens now?" Ruth climbed down from the chair, stood in front of her. "You stay. You said that already." "You need to say it." The widow didn't answer. Ruth placed the spoon on the table between them. The wood had cooled, but the black had deepened. It looked heavier than before. Outside, wind stirred the dry grass. Inside, the house held its breath. "I don't want to become like the others," the widow said. "You won't. And if I do, you'll still be you. But quiet." The spoon glinted again. and the fire behind them dropped low, as though someone exhaled straight through the coals. The fire had burned low by morning, but Ruth didn't ask for warmth. She crouched near the hearth anyway, tracing her spoon through the cold ash like a child dragging a stick in the dirt. Her hand moved slowly, patiently, as if something beneath the soot needed uncovering. The widow watched from the table, arms folded. "What are you doing?" Ruth didn't look up. She kept carving the same pattern, lines, curves, sharp angles, not random, not doodles, something too deliberate. "You listening to me, girl?" Ruth kept drawing. The widow stood and stepped closer. The ash revealed a shape. Square corners, 2 overlapping boxes, one marked with a small X near the edge. "Is that the floor?" the widow asked. Ruth nodded. "You marking something buried?" Again, a nod. The widow crouched, rubbed her palm over the spot marked with the X. The stone beneath felt different. Not loose, not broken, but softer somehow, like it wanted to give. She fetched the iron poker and wedged it into the edge of the brick. With one hard twist, the hearthstone cracked free. Underneath, tucked tight inside the hollow, was a bundle of old papers wrapped in wax cloth. The widow froze. "You knew these were here?" Ruth didn't answer. She pulled them out slowly. The cloth was sealed in soot and dust. The twine snapped with a dry pop. She unwrapped them on the table, hands trembling. Old letters, dozens, yellowed with age. The ink faded to brown, folded neatly, all addressed the same way. To Margaret H., private. The name stole her breath. "My mother," she whispered. Ruth stood still beside the hearth, watching. The widow opened the top letter. It was dated 36 years ago. A man's handwriting. "Margaret, she cries at night. No tears, just sound. You said it would pass. But she looks through me, like I ain't real. I don't think she's mine. I don't even think she's ours. D.H." The widow swallowed. D.H. She flipped to the second letter. "You told me she wasn't born like the others, that you never carried her full term. But she exists, Margaret. I see her. She hums when the house is quiet. You know that tune. Your mother sang it too." The widow's knees weakened. She pulled out a chair. "She was never born," she whispered. The third letter was shorter. "I can't do this anymore. I hear her voice even when she's gone. You said to burn the cradle. I did. She came back anyway." There was no signature on that one. The next letter had only one line. "Don't feed her." The widow's hands shook. She looked up at Ruth. "These are real." Ruth nodded once. "You're her." "No," Ruth said softly. "I'm what was left." The widow looked back down. The last letter in the bundle was the only one written by her mother. "I bled her out in the 2nd month. Or I thought I did. But she came back. Same face, same cry. No blood can stop her, not even mine." The widow choked on breath. She clutched the table. She tried to. Ruth nodded. "But I stayed. You're her child, the one that never made it." "No." "Then what are you?" "I'm the echo." The widow backed away, hitting the stove with her hip. "That's not possible." "She fed me. So I stayed." "You said that before." "I always say it." The widow looked around the room. Same walls, same hearth, the same chair creaking faint behind them. The house had not changed, but something inside it had shifted. She could feel it in her ribs. "She wrote these and never told me. She wanted to forget. But you wouldn't let her. She fed me." The widow paced the kitchen, stepping around the rocking chair like it might bite. "How many have you done this to?" Ruth sat down by the hearth again. "I don't count. But you remember all of it." The widow picked up the last letter again, her mother's script, her mother's name. "I'm not like her," she said. "You are. I didn't bleed anything out. I never carried anyone." Ruth tilted her head. "But you opened the door. I didn't know. You do now." The widow grabbed the letters, stuffed them back into the cloth, tied it fast with a torn apron ribbon. She pushed the bundle back under the hearthstone and sealed it tight. "No one else sees these." "They already have." The widow paused. "Who?" Ruth's eyes flicked toward the door. "He did. The sheriff." Ruth nodded. "He knew. He wrote them." The widow turned, her hands curled into fists. "Why's he still alive?" "He stopped feeding me." "And you left him alone?" "I waited." "For what?" "For someone who would feed me again." The words sat heavy. The widow backed toward the stove, breath thin. I didn't invite you. You boiled oats. I didn't know what you were, but you know now." The spoon sat on the edge of the hearth, blackened, still warm. The widow picked it up. I turned it in her hand. The R was still carved deep. "You made this." "Number I, just carry it." The widow stared at the stone beneath her feet, the hearth that had held the letters, the house that kept all its secrets buried but breathing. "This place knows you. It remembers. And it'll remember me too." Ruth nodded. The rocking chair moved again, slow and sure, though no one sat in it, and from behind the walls something sighed, long and low, like a name finally spoken after decades of silence. The widow didn't plan to go into town, but the flour had spoiled, and the salt tin was low, and Ruth's hunger never waited. So she hitched the old mule, loaded the cart with 2 empty sacks and a list she didn't need to read. Ruth climbed in without a word, spoon tucked tight against her ribs. They passed the empty fields, the willow trees that swayed even without wind, and the old schoolhouse with the bell that hadn't rung in a decade. Ruth hummed under her breath. The same song, same 6 notes. The widow didn't ask her to stop. The mill sat at the far edge of town. She liked it that way. Fewer stairs, less noise. The big wheel creaked as it turned through the shallow stream, boards swollen from years of weather. Inside, the scent of dust and cornmeal hung heavy. A young man leaned against the counter, wiping his hands with a rag. Barely 20, straw-colored hair, sleeves rolled, eyes that hadn't yet learned how to lie. "Need fine ground," the widow said. "And salt, if you've got it." He nodded. "That's fine. Give me a moment." Then he saw Ruth. The rag slipped from his hands. He stared, face paling fast. She didn't flinch. She just looked back. He stepped around the counter slowly, like approaching an animal that might bolt. "She with you?" The widow stiffened. "She is." He swallowed. "Her name's Ruth. That's what I call her. I saw her before." His voice cracked. The widow's shoulders rose. "You sure?" He nodded. "Same dress, same ribbon, same spoon." "When?" "I was 6, maybe 7. Ruth hummed once. That tune again, soft and slow. The young man went still. "That's it. That's what she sang." The widow glanced at Ruth. "Do you remember him?" Ruth didn't speak. She watched the boy without blinking. He took a step closer. "She led me out behind the store. Said she wanted to show me something. I followed. I shouldn't have." The widow's voice hardened. "What did she show you?" He pointed through the open door, past the fields. "There was a well. Not anymore. They sealed it up with stone. Said it was bad luck." Ruth hummed louder now. The boy flinched. She stood at the edge. "Said there was a girl at the bottom, waitin' to come out. I asked who. She said, 'Me.'" The widow stared at him. "And what did you do?" "I ran. Told my mama. She whipped me for lying. Said no girl like that ever lived in this town." The widow's hand shook on the counter. "And you never saw her again?" He nodded toward Ruth. "Not till now." The girl tilted her head. "You didn't feed me." The boy blinked. "What?" "You ran." The room went still. The boy backed up, fast. "She talked before." The widow didn't answer. The boy pointed again, more frantic now. "The well's still there, just under stone. She came from there. I swear it." Ruth's voice was calm. "Not from. Back to." The boy stumbled out the door, leaving the rag behind. Dust kicked up behind his boots. The widow watched him go, then turned to Ruth. "You remember that day?" "I remember all of them." "What was in that well?" Ruth turned to her. "What was left?" The widow didn't speak. She took her flour, paid in coins she hadn't counted, walked Ruth back to the cart without another word. On the way home, the mule slowed near the edge of the old field. Ruth tugged at her sleeve. "Stop here." The widow did. Ruth climbed down. I walked into the tall grass without fear. Her spoon hung from her fingers. The widow followed. It didn't take long to find it. A flat circle of stone sunken into the dirt. Weeds grew around it, but none crossed it. The air smelled of rust, of memory. Ruth crouched beside the stone, pressed her palm flat against it. "This is where I wait." The widow knelt beside her. "You were in there. I was everywhere, but this is where they saw me last." "What was it like?" "Cold." The widow closed her eyes. How long? Long enough. You came out on your own? No. Then who? You know. The widow's stomach twisted. My mother? Ruth nodded. She put you back? Yes. The wind stirred the grass, but not the stone. The widow touched its edge. You want to go back? I want to be seen. And after that? I want to stay. The mule snorted behind them, uneasy. Ruth stood. It's sealed now, but the seal never lasts. The widow rose too. Why show me? So you don't lie. The words hit like a slap. I haven't. You almost did. Just now, when he asked if I spoke. The widow stared down at the stone. I didn't know what to say. You will. Ruth walked back to the cart, climbed in, sat still, her spoon across her knees. The widow took one last look at the old well. The grass whispered around her boots. The stone didn't move, but she swore she heard something beneath it. A breath, a hum, a lullaby. She turned away, and as they rolled back toward the house, Ruth began to hum again. Louder this time, the same 6 notes. But now the widow knew every word. She couldn't stop thinking about it. The way the boy's voice shook. The way Ruth had said, back to. The way the stone covering the well hadn't grown over, hadn't cracked, hadn't even shifted with time. The widow lay in bed, eyes open to the ceiling. She could feel the weight of it, not in her arms, in her bones, in the center of her chest. By morning, she had made up her mind. Ruth stood by the window, already dressed, spoon tucked into her waistband like a knife. She didn't speak, just watched the widow get her boots on, wrap her coat tight, tie her hair back. We're going, the widow said. Ruth nodded once. They didn't take the mule. I didn't need tools. The ground was soft from the storm last week. The stones had already started to shift in the night, as if something beneath had been waiting. The walk was silent. When they reached the field, the sky hung low and gray, like it wanted to weep but hadn't yet found the nerve. The stone circle sat untouched, still smooth, still wrong. The widow dropped to her knees, dug her fingers around the edge, pried loose what she could, stone by stone. Some lifted easily. Others groaned like they remembered what lay below. Ruth knelt beside her, helped without speaking. After 20 minutes, the last slab gave way. The opening yawned before them, dark, quiet, but not empty. The widow reached for the lantern. I don't want to look alone. You're not, Ruth said. The light went down first. Then the widow, hands wrapped tight to the rope ladder someone had left long ago. She didn't ask who. She didn't want to know. The bottom was damp. Earth pressed close on all sides. The air didn't smell like rot. It smelled like dust and cedar. Ruth climbed down after her, feet bare on the old rungs. The lantern flickered. Then it found something. Wood. A small wooden crib, built from slats notched by hand. Still whole, barely weathered. Inside were bones. Small ones. Humans. The widow's knees gave way. No, she said. No. She dropped beside it, fingers shaking. They left her here, she whispered. They left her. Ruth crouched beside her, reached in. There was a second spoon, older, rougher, with a ribbon long faded to gray, the same R carved into its handle, a twin to the one Ruth carried. She fed me too, Ruth said. The widow broke. Her cry started low, then rose sharp. She covered her face, then pushed her palms against the ground like she could keep the grief inside by holding the earth still. Ruth sat beside her, laid her head against the woman's arm. She tried to keep me warm, Ruth whispered. She sang the song. She stayed till she couldn't. She was just a girl. They always are. The widow turned to her. How long have you been remembering this? Since it happened. Why didn't you say that? You weren't ready to see it. The widow lifted the old spoon, ran her thumb over the R. She carved this. She thought it'd mark me as hers. Did it? No one stays mine for long. The lantern flickered again. The widow stood, bones aching. We're not leaving her here. Ruth didn't speak. She deserves better. Yes, Ruth said. But the house won't let her stay long. She's coming with us anyway. She gathered the bones in her apron, careful, trembling, tied them in cloth, hold them close. They climbed out together. Back at the house, the widow dug behind the barn, dig deep, line the pit with stone, laid the cloth inside. She didn't mark it with a cross. She marked it with the second spoon tied to a stick with a new red ribbon. When it was done, she sat on the porch. Ruth sat beside her. The rocking chair didn't move, not a creak, not a sway. It stood still for the first time since Ruth arrived. Hours passed. The wind came and went. The sky turned soft and pink. The earth held its breath. Inside the house, the note sat folded where the widow had left it. Feed her once, and she'll stay forever. The widow didn't touch it. She just sat beside Ruth. And still, the chair didn't move. She didn't wait for Sunday, didn't wait for a gathering, a word, or a reason. She wrapped the cloth tighter around the bundle of bones and walked straight into town with Ruth beside her. The girl said nothing. The widow said less. They moved past porches and dusty steps, past women sweeping and men leaning on rails, all of whom slowed their eyes when they saw what she carried. The bones shifted once in her arms, light but not weightless. The sheriff's office stood crooked at the center of town. The front door was open like always, the air inside thick with tobacco and dust. He sat behind the desk, chewing the end of a matchstick. He looked up when they entered. His boots hit the floor heavily. "You shouldn't be here." The widow stepped forward, laid the cloth on his desk. "Do you remember this?" she said. He didn't answer. She untied the bundle. I pulled the cloth back slowly. The bones inside glinted dull yellow in the dim light. Small, fragile, arranged carefully, like a warning. The sheriff's face went pale. "No," he whispered. Ruth stepped beside the widow. "You put her there," the woman said. "I didn't." He stepped back. "You knew she was down there." He shook his head. "You wrote about her." His hand went to the drawer. She slammed it shut before he could open it. "I found your letters." His eyes locked on Ruth. She's not supposed to be anything," the widow cut in. "She never got the chance." The sheriff took another step back. His voice caught. "You brought her bones here. Why?" "So everyone sees." Ruth hummed, soft at first, then louder. The sheriff staggered, reached for his throat. "You can't talk your way out of this," the widow said. He gasped. "I read every word you wrote to my mother." He bent forward, hands at his neck. "She covered for you, and then she buried her own." His knees hit the floor. He gagged. The mouth opened wide, but no sound came out. Just the wet rasp of breath trying to escape. Ruth hummed louder. The townsfolk had begun to gather outside, drawn by something, the stillness, the sound, the feeling. They filled the doorway, watched in silence. The sheriff crawled forward, looked up at Ruth, tears in his eyes. She stopped humming. "You remember her now?" the widow asked. He nodded, choking. "You knew what she was. You knew what you made her into." He collapsed to his side, eyes wide, mouth moving uselessly. "Tell them," the widow said. "Tell them what you did." He clawed at the floor, reached for her ankle like he could hold her there. She didn't move. "I won't help you speak," she whispered. "Not now." He rolled onto his back, gasping at the ceiling. His lips moved, but still no sound came out. No voice, not even a breath. Ruth stepped forward. "Hold the spoon up." He stared at it like it might save him. Then she laid it gently across his chest. The sound he made wasn't a word, wasn't human. The widow turned to the crowd. "He put her in the well." No one answered. No one moved. She was a child, and he threw her away. Somewhere in the back, someone whispered, "It's true." The sheriff convulsed once, and then he stilled. Eyes open, mouth wide. No sound. The widow stepped over him, took Ruth's hand. They walked out together. No one stopped them. No one asked a single question. The rocking chair didn't move that night. Neither did the sheriff. They thought it was over. After the sheriff dropped in the dust like a man swallowed by silence. After the bones were seen, and the truth cracked open like a rotten seed, the widow thought maybe the house would sleep again. Maybe Ruth would be quiet. Maybe the rocking chair would stay still. But evil doesn't vanish. It retreats, waits, plans. He came at night, not walking this time, crawling, breathing through teeth, dragging a limp leg behind him like it belonged to someone else. Smoke already on his coat, rope tucked in his coat pocket like a memory. She heard the door creak, but she didn't rise. She sat by the fire, the letters on her lap, Ruth at her feet. "You came back," the widow said. He didn't answer. His face was twisted, mouth sealed, eyes screaming. "You want to finish what you started?" she asked. His fingers trembled around the match. Ruth stood. "No," the widow said to her. "Let him." He struck the match. The first curtain caught fast, then the beams, then the chair. Flames climbed like they remembered the house better than anyone else ever did. He didn't stay to watch it burn. He limped out the front door without looking back. But Ruth didn't move. The smoke curled around her dress, licked her hair, danced over the spoon in her hand. She stood in the center of it, eyes wide open, face lit orange by the blaze. The floor crackled, the ceiling groaned, and still she stood. The widow called out, "Ruth!" No answer. The roof began to split. The widow ran through the smoke, arms out. The letters burned at the edges. Her lungs begged her to stop. She found the girl in the center of the room, spoon raised like a torch, flames bending away from her body. She looked untouched, not even sweat on her brow. "Come with me," the widow coughed. "Now." Ruth blinked. He thought fire would end it. "It won't," the widow rasped. He tried to burn the memory. He only fed it. Ruth finally stepped forward. The fire opened for her. The air cooled as she passed. The widow followed close behind, the letters clutched to her chest. They stepped outside just as the roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. The whole town was there, standing in the road, barefoot, nightgowns, lanterns held in shaking hands. No one moved. No one asked how the girl had walked out unburned. Ruth stood in the center of the road, smoke behind her, spoon still in hand. Her shadow is long, her eyes are steady. Someone in the crowd whispered, "She's not real." "She is," the widow said. Another voice. "What is she?" "She's the one we buried and forgot." Ruth turned, faced them all. "I remember." No one breathed. "I remember every mother who couldn't keep me, every man who threw me out, every hand that dropped the spoon." Her voice didn't shout. It didn't need to. It filled every space. "And now," Ruth looked to the widow. "She fed me." The wind picked up. The fire roared behind them. The widow stepped forward. "She stays." Someone in the crowd shook their head. "What does that mean?" "It means this house," the widow said, pointing to the fire, "burns because of what you let happen." "We didn't." "You did. You all did." Someone started to cry. Ruth walked to the edge of the porch. The flames behind her are still reaching, still desperate. She held the spoon up high. The air bent around her. The fire hissed like it feared her now. "She's not gone," Ruth said. "She's with me." The widow unfolded the letters, held them out to the crowd. "Read them, see who wrote them, see who buried her." The wind caught the edges, carried ash across the road. No one stepped forward, not one. Ruth turned back to the fire. "I watched it die." "Let it fall," she whispered. And it did. The walls buckled, the roof dropped, the chimney cracked and split in half. Still, no one moved. The widow looked around, faces frozen in guilt, eyes filled with everything they'd hidden. "You knew," she said. "Every one of you." No one denied it. Ruth stepped down off the porch, the ashes soft under her bare feet. She walked straight through the crowd. No one stopped her. The spoon glowed faintly in her hand, not with flame, with memory. The sheriff's badge lay in the dirt outside his office the next morning, half melted. No one picked it up. The widow stayed in town. Ruth stayed with her. The house never burned again, because it had burned once, and the fire had spared only what it needed. Her. And the girl who remembered everything. The house was gone by morning, nothing left but ribs of scorched timber and a skeleton of the hearth. The rocking chair lay in pieces, blackened, unmoving. The spoon hadn't burned. It lay untouched in the ash. Ruth picked it up without a word. They didn't rebuild. The land didn't want it. The widow moved into her late mother's cottage, a mile down the old dirt road, a place she hadn't set foot in since the funeral. It smelled of dust and lilac soap and drawers that hadn't been opened in years. Ruth walked through it like she'd always known it, pausing once at the faded photograph above the mantel. "That's her," the widow said quietly. "Margaret." "She sang," Ruth replied. "I know." The widow swept each room herself, tossed sheets off furniture, lit the stove like her mother once did, slow and stubborn. She boiled water, salted beans, and fed the girl without question. Ruth ate in silence, never messy, never wasteful. She didn't thank her. She never had. At night, the girl would sit on the old stool near the window and hum. It didn't bother the widow anymore. She'd learned not to ask for silence. In the second week, the widow noticed something strange. A letter, folded neatly, placed dead center on the kitchen table. No footsteps, no drafts, just there. She opened it with shaking fingers. To her. Who took the spoon? You think she chose you. She didn't. She remembered you. She stays with the ones who let her. You fed her. You believed her. You listened. That's all it takes. Let her hum. Let her stay. She is not finished. There was no signature. She read it twice. Burned it on the stove. The next morning, another letter appeared. Same spot. You can't send her back. Not anymore. She is where she belongs. The widow tore that one in half, tossed the pieces outside, but still, the letters came. Once a week, folded clean. Always in the same place. Sometimes they were sentences. You're not like the others. Don't teach her your silence. She already knows your name. Other times they were just a single word. Stay. Listen, remember. The widow stopped trying to explain it. She let Ruth walk the perimeter of the cottage barefoot. Let her mark the doorframe with her spoon. Let her sleep, or not sleep, in the rocking chair that now creaked in the same rhythm as the one before. The widow watched her, day after day. Same size, same eyes, same soft face. You don't grow, she said once. Ruth shook her head. You don't age. I remember too much. The widow wiped her hands on a towel. You never sleep. I wait. For what? Ruth didn't answer. At night, when the wind howled through the gaps in the window panes, Ruth would hum louder. The widow found it calming, in time, like a warning that kept the real darkness outside. One night she asked, Do you remember all of them? Ruth nodded. All the houses? Yes. All the women? Yes. And the ones who didn't feed you? They forgot me. But you didn't forget them. No. The widow sat beside her, laid a hand gently on the girl's back. You're not angry. Ruth looked at her. Would it matter? She didn't ask again. Years passed that way. Or maybe just weeks. Time didn't behave properly around Ruth. Seasons bent. Calendars meant less. The townsfolk never came near. Not after the fire. Not after the sheriff stopped speaking. He never left his office again. Just stared at the wall. Mouthed words no one could hear. One afternoon, the widow left an extra bowl on the porch. Not for Ruth, just for whatever watched from the trees. She didn't look when she picked it up later. Empty. She understood now. Ruth wasn't just a child. She was something made out of memory, out of absence, out of what towns forget when it's easier than remembering. And memory never leaves. It waits. It sings. It hums through the floorboards. One morning, the widow found a letter that said, You will die before she does, but she'll remember you the longest. She folded that one, kept it in her apron pocket. One night, just before sleep, the widow turned to Ruth. Will you still be here when I'm gone? Ruth nodded. Will you remember me? Yes. Will you sing? Yes. The widow nodded. Good. That was enough. The spoon stayed on the mantel now, but Ruth never let it gather dust. She polished it once a week. Same cloth, same motion, like she was keeping the memory alive. The widow kept the stove warm, kept the curtains drawn, kept a second bowl on the porch. And the letters kept coming, always addressed the same. To her who took the spoon. No one else read them, because no one else had the girl who stayed forever.